thought staying at an Airbnb by myself was a good idea. I guess I just wanted to save some money on my weekend trip to the city. But now, as I sit here on this lumpy soil, unable to sleep, I regret everything. It started normally enough. I arrived at the small house late Friday afternoon and was greeted by the host, an older man named Gary. He showed me around the place quickly. It was pretty basic, with just a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom downstairs. Upstairs was Gary's bedroom, which he told me was off limits. I thought that was a little weird, but didn't think much of it. After dropping my bags in the room, I headed out to explore the city. I didn't get back to the Airbnb until after midnight. The house was dark and quiet, too quiet. I got ready for bed and settled in, but I just couldn't seem to fall asleep. Every little creak and groan of the old house made me jump. Eventually, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was woken up by the sound of footsteps overhead. Gary must be up there, I thought, but the footsteps seemed to pace back and forth, like someone wandering restlessly. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours. Who would be pacing like that in the middle of the night? The next morning, I cautiously asked Gary if he had trouble sleeping. "Not me," he said. I slept like a baby. A chill ran through me. If he wasn't the one pacing upstairs, then who was? Later that day, I returned to the Airbnb after some time exploring the city. The place seemed empty, no sign of Gary. I figured he was out running errands. As I headed to my room, I noticed the basement door was ajar. That door had definitely been shut before. Feeling uneasy, I went to close it. But as I approached, I thought I heard a faint thumping sound coming from the darkened basement. Thump, thump, thump. My hand froze on the doorknob as a wave of terror washed over me. After a few minutes paralyzed by fear, I was able to shut the door and retreat to the safety of my room. Once night fell, the noises started up again. More footsteps upstairs, too heavy to be Gary's. Strange scraping and clicking sounds in the walls. Muffled banging coming from the basement. I huddled on the lumpy sofa, blankets wrapped tightly around me, too afraid to go in the bedroom. Exhausted, I eventually fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I was leaving this place immediately. As I gathered my stuff, I heard a door creak open behind me. I spun around and saw a pale, haggard-looking man staring at me from the basement doorway. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. He croaked, "You're not supposed to be here," and started shambling towards me. I screamed and ran out the front door without looking back. I drove home, shaken, glancing constantly in the rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got back, I did some searching online about the Airbnb and made a chilling discovery. A news article from 1960 about a father and son who were murdered in that very house. Their bodies were found in the basement. The photo of the father looked eerily similar to the man I'd seen. Clearly, their spirits were still trapped there, haunting that house. I've learned my lesson. No more Airbnbs for this girl. I'll happily pay extra for a safe, ghost-free hotel from now on. The memories of that house still haunt me. The pounding footsteps, strange sounds in the night, and that sad ghost condemned to wander its halls for eternity. My weekend getaway turned into a true nightmare, one I won't soon forget. It was a cold, dreary night when I arrived at the Airbnb I had booked for the weekend. A heavy fog hung in the air, obscuring the old Victorian house from view until I was right upon it. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and made my way up the creaky wooden steps to the front porch. My first thought was that the place could use some TLC. The white paint was peeling, and the roof sagged under years of neglect. But hey, it was cheap, and I was just looking for a place to crash for a couple nights. I knocked on the front door, but no one answered. "Hello," I called out. "It's Amanda. I booked the room for the weekend." Silence. I double-checked the listing, and it said to come on in if the host wasn't home. The door creaked open, revealing a dark foyer. I felt along the wall for a light switch, but the lights must have been burnt out. Using my phone's flashlight, I navigated down the hall to the room that was listed as mine. It was a decent-sized bedroom with antique furniture and an adjoining bathroom. The four-poster bed looked comfortable enough, so I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge. It let out a loud creak, startling me in the quiet house. Suddenly, I heard voices downstairs, male voices. I froze, realizing I wasn't alone. My pulse pounded as I tiptoed into the hallway. Whoever was here was not the Airbnb host. I needed to get out, now. The wooden floors groaned under my steps as I crept toward the staircase. The voices grew louder. I peered down into the foyer and could see the shapes of two men standing by the front door, appearing to argue about something. I ducked back behind the wall, my hand trembling over the phone in my pocket. Should I call for help? I had no idea who these men were or what they were doing here. Holding my breath, I slipped down a few stairs, praying the old wood wouldn't give me away. I just had to make it to the door unnoticed. But suddenly, a board let out an audible creak under my foot. The voices went silent. I froze in place. My eyes squeezed shut. Footsteps approached the bottom of the stairs.
"Who's there?"
A man bellowed. I shook my head, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. The footsteps drew closer. I forced my legs into motion, bounding recklessly down the remaining steps and making a beeline for the door. "Hey," the man was close behind me. I grasped the doorknob, my clammy hand slipping. Keys rattled as the second man fumbled to lock the door from the inside. Adrenaline shot through my veins. It was now or never. I wrenched the door open and flew out into the night, running at full speed without looking back. The fog was so thick I couldn't even see my car, but I had to get as far away from that house as possible. I ran until my lungs burned, my breath coming out in panicked wheezes. In the distance, I could make out the glow of streetlights cutting through the haze. I followed them until I emerged onto a main road bathed in the harsh glare of a 24-hour gas station. Only then did I slow my pace, gulping the cool night air. My legs wobbled as I walked on jelly limbs into the comforting fluorescence of the station. The bored cashier glanced up in surprise as I stumbled through the door. I was a disheveled, terrified mess, still struggling to catch my breath.
"Please, help,"
I gasped.
"Call the police."
The cashier's eyes went wide as I relayed the chilling tale, my voice still trembling. Who knows what those men were doing in that house, or what they would have done if they'd caught me. A deep sense of unease washed over me, even in the safety of the well-lit store. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the shadows. The police arrived quickly, and I recounted everything. They said they would investigate the house immediately. I refused to go back with them. That place held a terrifying energy I'd never wanted to encounter again. I got myself a motel room for the night instead, but I didn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for creaking floors or disembodied voices, wondering how I ever could have felt safe in the company of strangers. I don't usually stay at Airbnbs when I travel. I'm more of a hotel kind of guy. But when my company sent me on a business trip to a small town with limited lodging options, I reluctantly booked a room using Airbnb. The house looked nice enough in the photos online. It was an old Victorian-style home that had been renovated into a couple of rental units. I arrived late in the evening after a long day of driving. The neighborhood was dark and quiet as I lugged my suitcase up the front steps. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I checked the app and saw there were instructions to enter using a keypad code. I punched in the code, and the front door unlocked with a click. I stepped into the dark foyer, feeling a bit uneasy. "Hello," I called out, but only silence greeted me. According to the app, the owner lived on site in a separate unit. I figured he must have gone to bed already. I made my way down a long hallway to the room I had booked. It was sparsely furnished with just a bed, nightstand, and dresser. The only light came from the moon shining through the sheer curtains. I quickly unpacked and got ready for bed. As I was settling in, I heard voices coming from the backyard. I peered out the window into the darkness, but couldn't see anyone. The voices were low at first, but gradually got louder. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but something about the strange voices made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore them and go to sleep, but the voices kept me tossing and turning all night. The next morning, I headed out to explore the town before my work meetings. When I returned in the evening, the owner was there to greet me. "How's it going?" he asked with a smile. "Sleep okay last night?" I hesitated before answering. Should I mention the creepy voices? I decided against it. "Slept fine. Thanks," I lied. Over the next few nights, the voices returned. They would start as whispers before swelling into loud, angry shouts. I had no idea what they were saying, but the tones sounded threatening, even violent. I confronted the owner about the voices, but he looked at me like I was crazy. "There's no one out back at night, just a wooded area." "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" he asked, clearly skeptical, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. Every night, the voices taunted me, keeping me on edge. Exhausted and unnerved, I decided my best option was just to avoid the Airbnb as much as possible. During the day, I worked or explored the town. At night, I would grab dinner and drinks at local bars, only returning to the Airbnb when I was sure I could fall right to sleep. This went on for a few nights until I returned one evening to find the front door unlocked and standing wide open. "Hello," I called out nervously. Silence. I walked slowly through the house, checking each room. Everything seemed undisturbed, but when I entered my bedroom, I froze. Scratched into the dresser were the words, "You will never leave this house alive." I staggered backward in shock. Was this some kind of sick joke? Just then, I heard laughter coming from the backyard. I rushed to the window and saw shadowy figures moving in the moonlight. The voices were back louder than ever. I packed my bags and fled the house, checking into a hotel downtown for my remaining nights. I complained to Airbnb, but they were less than helpful. I still have no idea who was at the Airbnb those nights or what malicious intent they had. But I'll never again ignore those gut feelings that something is wrong. Sometimes horror hides in the most ordinary places, in the friendliest faces. I'm just grateful I escaped with my life.